One of the things that I think is important is when people talk about these skills, a lot of business leaders or anyone, even if you're thinking about it personally, is what's the return on the investment of this training? It is really hard to define that because we're teaching people ultimately how to think a little bit differently, how to feel better, how to navigate that chaos. So it's not that by doing resilience training, you're going to see 2x in terms of your productivity.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Carré Le Page. He's a resilience expert, mental wellness advocate, storyteller, and founder of Resilient Minds. No surprise, we talked about the concept of resiliency. What is it? Why is it important? And that we all have it. This is an absolutely fabulous conversation I know you're going to love. Kare, welcome so much. I'm excited to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you, Manya. Me too. I'm excited to be here.
Before we dig into the topic of resiliency, something near and dear to both of us, my first question for everyone is what would the title of a book be about you if your worst enemy wrote it?
Probably, I was thinking about this just before the call, and it might be something along the lines of never gets it done. And I say that because I'm looking at books on the floor here, 4 books that I've started. I've finished one of them, and I tend to start a lot of things and not necessarily finish them. And that's obviously been one of the, I guess, a catalyst for me to focus so much on resilience, because it's one of the things that I often say when I define resilience is how do we keep moving forward? So I think even just by thinking about that, that would really irk me if an enemy wrote a book or had a title of a book that said something like that, never finishes anything or never gets it done. That's probably a bit of fuel for the fire. That's what I try to remind myself. When I see things like that, I think to myself, okay, at least I'm aware of it now, time to make some change. So that I do think that I do finish stuff, now that I reflect on it, but that would be something that would really irk me if that's what other people thought.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was thinking back to several started knit and crochet projects that I have in my basket. And it's such a thing among those of us who do these kind of crafts that you have multiple things in progress at any given time and are often, instead of working on existing one, you just pick up a new one because somehow that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's probably a part of the modern world, and it's a real challenge that I think most of us have is this constant what's that over there, or is that book better, or can I make that crochet even better? So I'm glad to hear that I'm probably not the only one.
Well, you're not the only one, and you're right. I do think it's a symptom of our modern, fast-paced, always connected, even when you really don't want to be world. Okay. Well, we are talking about resilience today. It's something both you and I think a lot about, as I said. How do you define it?
Oh, that's such a good question because I ask every time I do a workshop or a keynote, I like to ask this question. I think if I was to sum it down to one thing, it's keep moving forward. I used to love thinking about life as this metaphor of water. Water always finds a way, and that's what I feel that that's sort of like a nice symbol for me and my business, and for what I like to do and help people is think like water, be fluid. Bruce Lee said it, I think, back in the 70s, and I've sort of latched onto that idea. So yeah, keep moving forward. Doesn't matter if it's not about persistence as much. It's more around uh, deciding, if there's a pivot or we have to slow down or we have to speed up or we have to even pause sometimes. But either, no matter what, we find a way to keep moving forward.
Right. That water analogy is fabulous. As you were saying that, I was already thinking of different rivers that have changed course because something got in the way and the like.
Fun fact about water, if I could just throw it in, is it's the only element to exist naturally in all 3 states. So it can exist as a solid, a gas, or a liquid. naturally. And and so when I think about exactly, I think about rivers, if there's a rock in the way, it will meander through. Even if it hits a dam, eventually it goes forward. There's always water is the most fluid thing and most adaptable thing I think that I can think of.
Right. That's interesting about it's existing in three states at the same time. I never thought about that. And I'm sure we could work that into the resilience analogy as well. Somehow, all these different states, different ways that we need to be resilient, or different places we need to be resilient. I talk a lot on the show about leadership and managers and the importance of being resilient themselves and supporting resilience in their employees. Why does it matter in a professional environment?
Well, I often say that resilience is it's seen as a soft skill, but I always think it's the sharpest skill that we can have in any situation. Resilience is so important in the office or the professional environment because we are living in this state of chaos right now. And I don't think it's just right now. I think it's been for quite a few years where there's so much uncertainty, there's so much change, there's technological advancements every single day, the expectations are growing, the whole idea of do more with less. So there's a lot of things that are outside of our control. What resilience does is it allows people to focus more on what they can do versus all of those other factors that are outside of their control. And I think the stats are all headed in the wrong direction, even though we're talking about mental wellness and we're talking about opening up a lot more. The reality is that burnout's going up, stress is going up, anxiety is going up, absenteeism and presenteeism, where people show up, they're present physically, but they're not actually present emotionally. All of those things are impacting businesses. And so, if we can help our people build this resilience skill or this resilience muscle, it allows them to be the best version of themselves at the office. And then that allows them to be better people at home. And the downstream effects are awesome too.
So, in terms of personal resilience, I hear what you were saying. What role does the actual workplace have in not causing burnout or contributing to burnout or that presenteeism or that stress?
It's a really great question, and that's obviously one of the challenges that we have. When I talk to organizations, sometimes the leaders say, "Well, look, it's the way it is. It's busy here." We're kind of. I had one business describe itself as it's like we're driving at 50, 60 miles an hour in a car, and we don't have time to stop and fix the car. We just got to fix it as we go. So I think number one is just by having this conversation, it demonstrates that the business is aware of it and cares about people's wellness. So I think just by having someone like me even talk about this subject, I think is a good step forward. But the idea is one of the things that resilience isn't, coming back to your definition, is it's not suck it up and get on with it. And that's what I think. I think sometimes resilience does get that bad rap where people think, just move on. And I think that what I like to tell organizations is that sometimes it's really about being aware of the state of your people, understanding what it is that they need, and giving them the tools and the strategies and simple ways that they can get through tougher times, challenging times. That's part one. Part two is also acknowledging that the business has a role to play. Often we have senior leaders or founders even that are quite chaotic. They move at a ridiculous speed. They're working 24 hours a day. They expect that from their people. That's unrealistic, and that's why that contributes a lot to burnout. So when I talk about resilience to people, I try to emphasize that's out of your control. You can't necessarily control that person. That's like trying to control a thunderstorm. What you can do is focus on what's in your control. So how do you set boundaries? How do you have that conversation with him or her or someone in leadership to acknowledge that you are at that point? Those are things that I think are practical and can really help.
Absolutely. I think back to my own experience where I really first started thinking about the concept of resilience in the psychological sense. And it was because this thing external to me happened to me. Somebody made a decision and it changed my life. And it was really awful way to learn the lesson of I can only control what I do. And it was an obvious lesson of I can only control what I do, right? It wasn't like being in the workplace where you are working with somebody every day and you think, oh, I can just encourage them to do this differently, or I can just, if I just tell him I can't do it, he's going to stop asking. So I learned it in a very specific way of, oh yeah, I guess the world is just going to go on and I'm just going to have to figure out how to deal with it.
It's funny because I think resilience is an innate skill in some aspects. Ultimately, we don't have a choice. You just kind of you have to get on with it. I think that what is really important about, practicing resilience, or at least talking about it and training it, is this idea that when those things happen, which are inevitable in some capacity, whether or not they're small things or they're massive things, how can we be best prepared for that? And that's I guess where I really focus on preventative stuff too, preventative tools. And so if you can get through this, then you can get through that. But ultimately, so many of us are thrown in the deep end randomly. That whole razor's edge of life, which is something that I think about a lot. And so we just have to be as ready as we can be.
Yes. And it's you can't be kind of frozen by should I turn right at this corner or should I turn left, which is the way that the bad thing is going to happen. And you have to just do the one that works for you and then deal with whatever happened around that corner. You talk about preparation, and I do a bit of work with business continuity professionals and crisis management teams. And that is all about what do we do to make the business, help the business be ready. So when something bad happens, those tools are already in place. And then you can more easily help your folks tap into their own resilience. But I never thought about the term resilience before somebody said it about survivors like me. And I remember I said to the person who said it, well, I'm not resilient. How do I get that? How come these people are lucky and they have it and I don't? I think we're talking about it more and more these days, but how do we help people understand? Because I have also had people say to me, well, I'm not resilient. And I counter with, yes, you are. How do we help people understand that about themselves, whatever their external situation is?
One of the things that I lean on a lot when I talk to organizations or anyone really is that when you look up the most important skills of 2025, I think it was the last time I looked at the job report that comes out annually, or I think every couple of years. It lists the critical skills that are important in life. And a skill, when you see resilience was second after critical thinking, with the arrival of AI. And so when you think about resilience being that high up as a skill that is necessary, I was interested in the fact that it was number two, but I was also loved the idea that, or the notion that it was seen as a skill. And so I talk to people about that and say it is a skill. It's like hitting a tennis ball over the net. The first times you do it, it might be clunky and you might get frustrated because you can't really get there, but you do that 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and then eventually it just becomes natural. Same thing with resilience. Same thing with, those irritations. Someone cuts you off on traffic, the first instinct is to yell and curse and honk your horn. But then, if the more you practice that, the idea around these simple skills, these simple tools, excuse me, that can develop that skill, then, 5, 6 times later, it's like water off a duck's back. And you're like, that person must be having a really bad day if they're rushing or they're driving so dangerously.
I've noticed that in myself from earlier times to now, how easily it's just, okay, I don't know what's happening with that person. Let's move on.
Mm. And ultimately, when we honk our horn and when we get irritated, the person who's suffering the most is us.
Yes.
So it's like whenever I feel myself irritated, I'm like, oh, this is only affecting me now. Like the other person's moved on, and so that's a quick reset as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a good reminder of, I'm responsible for my own feelings and my own response, and the outside world will things will happen, but it's I make that choice whether to remain frustrated or just accept it and move on. So, everyone, I think, has had a moment in their life or their work that changes how they think about being a leader or taking care of other people. What was one of those moments for you?
Well, I guess one of the big catalysts for me was when ChatGPT came roaring out. I don't even remember the year. I think it was 2023, December, and then early 24. I was working as a marketing leader for a content and design team, and so I had a meeting with the team to say, hey, what do we think about AI? And I could see that half of the team were petrified, and half of them were excited. And it was just such a visceral moment for me to see these people nervous about something that was going to change. And to the point where they didn't, their immediate response was resistance. And I thought to myself, this is going to be quite, um, impactful as a technology on us and who we are and the work that we do. And if we're not prepared to at least be open-minded about it, I think that we really need that we'll be in trouble. That was one of the things that I could see how much it was impacting people's mental health as well as they were anxious, they were nervous. So we started to talk a lot about that. Let's focus on what we can control. That was just one little thing, one little moment, but it was a big it was a small thing in the whole scheme of things, but it was a moment where I really paid attention to, well, if we don't have the skills necessary, it's going to be a really challenging path. If I could offer another one, it might be that I spent 20 years working in travel, and when COVID hit, it was crazy. It was people were scared. And I remember walking over to it was early March. I remember walking over to some other people. We were all in the office back then, right? And one of the girls in my team, she said, Carré, we need you to give us a pep talk. We need you to tell us that everything's going to be okay. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, thank you for thinking that putting me in that sort of, bucket that you feel like I can give you that pep talk. But I think my message to them was much the same as what it's been with when we talk about resilience is, we just got to focus on what we can do. So I think to myself, when anytime I'm a leader, I really want to be, anytime required to, really step up as a leader, it's really about ensuring that people feel that they have the support, but that they also have the necessary tools to be able to manage it themselves when the cookie comes to the crunch.
You're listening to Notes on Resilience. I'm Manya Chilinsky, speaker and advisor. My work examines how people and systems behave under pressure and what survival and disruption reveal about leadership, culture, and change. You can learn more about my work, including speaking and leadership support, at manyachilinsky.com/services. You can also subscribe to the newsletter at manyachilinsky.com/notes for monthly insights. Now, back to the show. Right. Absolutely. Thinking about, your work with teams and your work in travel, if you could design an organization to be quote unquote perfectly resilient, which of course would be a different definition probably every second, but what would be the first thing you would do?
This is a good question. If I'm thinking about what it takes to build an organization that is perfectly resilient, I mean, it's probably a bit of a cliche, but I do think it comes down to the leader. I think it ultimately comes down to who is in charge and what values do they believe in. And so if I'm leading that organization, I would really emphasize what are my values and make them crystal clear. When you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was that clear is kind, which is one of the tools that I talk a lot about because I think there are so many challenges with stress and anxiety because of communication these days. I think, despite the fact that we can communicate 17 different ways, someone will message me on LinkedIn and send me a text and then email me at the same time. The same person is messaging three different things that through that channel. And so it's not necessarily good communication. And so one of the things that I would say is let's get back to basics and focus on clarity. So that would be probably the first thing that I would really want to emphasize is how do we make sure that we've got a strong leader and how do we make sure that that leader can communicate clearly exactly what's important to the business and how and where we're going and how we're going to get there.
I like that phrase, clear is kind. And sometimes we think about communications, it's one piece of the whole, which it is. There's business, there's so many things going on. But in other ways, it's the whole game. It's the only way your team knows who you are, what you're thinking, what the goal is, what your values are. I appreciate you bringing up the concept of values. And I don't know how well we're doing in truly being clear. And you mentioned earlier some companies who are just like, oh, we just can't do this. We've got too much going on. And but you do have time to be clear. And when you're not, things go wrong. And how do you help people understand that the absence of something is a problem?
I mean, I've seen it so many times. When I was working as a marketing leader, half my team would always complain about the quality of the briefs that they got. So they would get a brief from a client, an internal client, that would say, "We need this thing and this thing," and they would go off and they would write the blog or create the design piece, and inevitably it was wrong because the clarity wasn't there at the beginning. And so we implemented a simple thing, which was the reverse brief. That was where we would take that brief and we would interpret it and then we would give that brief back to the person and say, here's what I think you want, can you confirm that? Now, we don't not everyone has time for all that every single time, but the emphasis was Abraham Lincoln says, if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Something along those lines. I probably butchered that, but the idea being, if we spend the time up front, it pays dividends when we actually have to do the work. And I love that metaphor because I think that that's it. It's like any organization says we don't have time to communicate properly. It says, well, you're going to have a lot more time to fix things. You're going to need a lot more time to fix things afterwards.
Yes. Yes, it is. Somehow a lot of organizations are in that situation of we're just going to move fast. If it breaks, we'll fix it. And we're not going to spend the time thinking ahead. I know that's a pretty big thing in tech these days, the whole move fast and break things and then we'll fix them. And I can't say whether that's really the right way to be developing tech, but it's largely not the right way to deal with humans in other environments.
When I say something about that, I really resist and resent that saying. I've heard that so many times, and the reason for that is because I feel that when we talk about moving fast and breaking things, we're not really thinking about what we're breaking. And right now, social media is the perfect example of the impact that it's had, particularly on our youth. And we're seeing that now. And that whole mentality, I think it came from Facebook, the Zuckerberg early days. It's like we're just going to move fast and we'll fix it as we go. We're not that no one's fixing those sort of things. And it's extremely infuriating to have that mentality. I don't mind the mentality of moving fast and adapting along the way, and I understand that people want to move with pace, competitive advantage, and there's a lot boils down to being agile, but I think if it's at the expense of things, we really need to question that, and that's what we're seeing now with AI too. We're implementing these things, and we don't know how. they're going to impact us.
Right. And the corollary to that is the concept of spending so much time thinking about can I do something and not thinking should I do the thing. I think those go together and kind of have us where we are these days.
Fantastic point. Yeah, that whole idea of just because I can doesn't necessarily mean that I should. Yeah, that's so true. I wish more people thought like that. It just took a moment to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are at the end of our time, which I'm very sad about because I love
Me
talking with
too.
you about resiliency. So, what I want to ask one last question, like, what didn't I ask you that you would want listeners of this podcast to know about resiliency or any of these topics we've been discussing?
One of the things that I think is important is when people talk about these skills, a lot of business leaders or anyone, even if you're thinking about it personally, is what's the return on the investment of this training? And it is really hard to define that because we're teaching people ultimately how to think a little bit differently, how to feel better, how to navigate that chaos. So it's not that by doing resilience training you're going to see 2x in terms of your productivity. So it's very hard. That's probably one of the biggest challenges that I face when I talk to organizations. But I always think of the metaphor of a restaurant, or the artwork that you see, the ambience that you have when you go out to a nice restaurant. Just because there's a beautiful painting on the wall, you can't measure the return on investment of that painting being there, but you can. But you know that it's making a difference. You know that people are going to come in and they're going to have a better meal and a better experience because you've invested in that ambience. I think that's something that leaders should really consider when they think about training resilience or they think about any sort of development. It doesn't. We live in this world where everything has to have a if I invest X, I'm going to get Y. Sometimes I really believe in the fact that you know that this is going to help people. That should be enough to invest and say, yep, I'm going to really ensure that I help my people navigate this change, this challenge, this chaos that exists in this modern world. So I'd encourage leaders to think less about the specific ROI when it comes to training like this, because it will make a difference.
Right. Absolutely. You have the best analogies. I
Thank you.
I'm going to be borrowing a few of them and I will absolutely credit you on them. Before we stop recording here, can you share with our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how they can reach you?
Yeah, thanks, Manya. Well, so I started Resilient Minds. I run a business called Resilient Minds, and I train organizations, leaders, young kids, even, and individuals on the power of resilience when it comes to navigating today's world. We're living in a world of change and challenge and lots of chaos. So I have a website which is called resilientmindsco.com. I'm on LinkedIn pretty actively. I'm on Instagram as well. I have a newsletter that I send out twice a week. I tell a lot of stories. So what you just said there in terms of metaphors, like I really believe in the power of storytelling to get messages across. So it's not so much theory, it is practical tools, but I don't focus too much on the theory behind things. I like to share stories and analogies and quotes and things like that to really help get the message across.
Oh, that's great. I will put links to those in the show notes to make it easier for folks to reach you. Carré, thank you so much. This was such a fabulous conversation.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I've been following your podcast for a while, so I'm really genuinely excited to be here. And I love what you do. Anyone who's talking about resilience is fantastic in my book. So it was wonderful to spend the time together.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for checking out this episode, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to Notes on Resilience. I'm Manya Chilinsky, a speaker and advisor. My work focuses on how leaders support people through pressure and disruption. The show is edited by Neil Panji, and it's hosted on Buzzsprout. Subscribe to the podcast to stay connected and sign up for the newsletter at manyachilinsky.com/notes for monthly insights and updates.